people that the Egyptians disregarded. So is that true? Hard to say. But once again, it's just one view of one commentary. Let's see. Benjamin gets a big blessing because he was one of the favorites of Jacob. Remember, he was Joseph's younger brother. So, of course, he was with the favored wife, so he'd be one of the favorites of Jacob. Verse 16. Talking about Joseph. Did it switch to Joseph? Oh, yeah. Oh, sorry. Verse 13. Joseph gets the biggest blessing, not Benjamin. So Joseph's blessing starts in verse 13, and it goes to 17. So it talks about how he was the special one, the best the sun brings forward, the finest the moon can yield, yada, 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 because he was the favorite son. Let all these rest on the head of Joseph, on the brow of the prince among his brothers. In one of the translations, instead of among, it says, or the one separated from. And of course, the separation refers to when his brothers sold him into slavery. On the brow of the prince, Joseph was made a prince in Egypt because of all the good things he did for Pharaoh at the time. And then even his two sons are referenced down at the bottom. Such are the tens thousands of Ephraim, and such are the thousands of Manasseh. And Joseph's sons are in this list of Jacob's sons because remember, Jacob adopted Joseph's two sons. When Joseph visited Jacob, when Jacob visited Joseph in Egypt, he says in Genesis chapter 48, verse 5, "Now then, your two sons born to you in Egypt before I came to you will be reckoned as mine. Ephraim and Manasseh will be mine, just as Reuben and Simeon are mine." So that's why Joseph's two kids are in this listing of Jacob's kids. Zebulon, no big deal about his blessing. Let's see, is that Zebulon? Oh, Zebulon and Ishar, if we go to verse 19, it says, "They will feast on the abundance of the seas." And those two tribes settled right near the seaports of Tyre and Sidon, so they were able to feast on the abundance of the seas. So kind of a prophecy of what was going to happen later. About Gad, he says, Gad was one of the defenders of the faith. It says that they were the strongest tribe of the 12, and they were able to repel and attack their enemies. Just like Jacob tells us in Genesis 49. He says, Gad will be attacked by a band of raiders, but he will attack them at their heels. And they become one of the biggest defenders of Israel. They're kind of like the guardians. Verse 21, he chose the best land for himself. The leader's portion was kept for him. Dan, the tribe of Dan, they were another good fighting group. In verse 22, we're told, Dan is the lion's cub springing out of Bashan. Naphtali is abounding with the favor of the Lord and full of his blessing. They got some of the choicest land. Asher is that one's kind of strange. I don't know why Asher would be the most blessed of sons. I couldn't find any commentaries that would tell me why that was the most blessed tribe. But anyway, to reinforce that message, it says, let him bathe his feet in oil. Now, imagine walking all the time. No cars, no horses, no camels to ride on. You had to walk the whole time. So imagine how dried out and tired your feet got. And then imagine what it would feel like to have your feet bathed in oil. Probably feel pretty good. The bolts of your gates will be iron and bronze. Your strength will equal your days. All right. And then Moses trying once again to reinforce to the Israelites, you're not going to find another God like our God. The eternal God is your refuge, and because he's the only true God. The eternal God is your refuge, and underneath are the everlasting arms. He will drive out your enemies before you, saying, destroy them. So Israel will live in safety. Jacob will dwell secure in a land of grain and new wine, where the heavens drop dew. You're going to be into the promised land. Blessed are you, Israel. Who is like you, a people saved by the Lord? He is your shield and helper and your glorious sword. Your enemies will cower before you, and you will tread on their heights. If only they kept the word. If only they kept the law. But we know that they don't. Christy's going to like this verse here. In verse 34, verse 4, then the Lord said to Moses, this is the land I promised on oath to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob when I said, I will give it to your descendants. I have let you see it with your eyes, but you will not cross over into it. just kind of rubbing it in.
Yeah, I think it's rude, but that's God at that time. Before Jesus.
Oh. Okay. And then God buries him in Moab.
Is that the only man that God buried? He didn't cremate him.
Yeah. I don't think we ever see that again, Gary. We've seen.
And it seemed like that Satan was after his body.
Oh.
And one of the angels at one time was there to kind of protect it.
That's an interesting point.
I don't know where that came from.
Huh. That's, yeah. If you could locate that, but that's a very interesting thought that God buried him to defend his body. Interesting. Huh. Verse 7, Moses was 120 years old when he died, yet his eyes were not weak, nor his strength gone. And, like I said earlier, I saw it as God not allowing him to die, and then Karen says, well, he had plenty of years left. But God just told him, your job is done, time to go. Verse 9, now Joshua son of Nun was filled with the Spirit. In some translations, this is capitalized, so it tells us that that's the Holy Spirit. Verse 10, since then, no prophet has risen in Israel like Moses, whom the Lord knew face to face. And here we get into that big discussion that we had back in Exodus. Who ever saw God? Jesus tells us in John, verse 6, that no one has seen the Father except the one who is from God, only he is in the Father. So once again, I gave you guys the supplement that we had before from Exodus, who saw God. And it goes through, I think, 3 different theologians and commentaries to kind of say, well, here's what they could mean, here's why no one ever saw God, and maybe here's how they could have seen God. So it's a pretty good discussion to reread again.
I thought,
yeah.
did Joshua ever have the intimate connection with God as Moses did?
Oh.
Gary, I don't think anybody ever had such an intimate connection as Moses and God. Joshua was a good servant, but I don't think he ever had the same favor that Moses had with God.
He had the spirit of wisdom, but he didn't have all the spirit that Moses had.
Yeah. And
all right, another off the subject on 33, chapter 33. Is that pretty similar to the end of Genesis? Would it equate to what was said to each of the sons?
Pretty close.
Or is this all new?
It's pretty close. Here they all received blessings, whereas when Jacob gave the blessing, he gave some of them kind of a backhanded blessing. Here, at least it's bringing out the best of them.
So this would be more than 400 plus years later.
Yep. Something a little bit better. Let's see here. I thought verse 12 was interesting in chapter 34, where it says, "No one has ever shown the mighty power or performed the awesome deeds that Moses did in the sight of all Israel." And you think back to when Moses was first called by God, how he rejected God 5 different times. And if God would have picked somebody else, Moses would have never been able to do that for God.
And you think back to the picture that you passed out several months ago where they had horns on Moses as a statue.
Yeah.
Hopefully the protesters wouldn't get after that one.
Well, luckily we don't have a statue of Moses anywhere around here. Otherwise, they might have.
Politically incorrect.
Yeah, that's okay. That's okay. You're among friends. Yeah, I haven't seen the news for a couple days, so I'm kind of happy.
I don't watch it.
What's that? What?
We don't watch the news too much anymore.
No.
It's mostly been about
The weather, that's about
teachers
it.
getting back to work and how
No, I bet that's
how
right.
alarmed they are.
How
you know?
alarmed teachers
Yeah,
are?
what are you gonna do when the kid, one
I
lady
put a
was saying,
thermometer on
yeah,
my
what
deck
if we
this
get sick?
afternoon and
You
it
can't get
topped out at
subs now.
120.
She says, what it'll be like.
So I have
And
to
what
see that.
happens if one kid in your classroom gets sick? Do they go through and test all? It's just
Can- And so Karen was just saying that on the news they're talking about talking to teachers and how school's going to look like when they come back. And what happens if one of your kids gets sick in class? Do you have them all tested? And with how terrible the test is, I can't see that.
yeah, it's just,
My goodness, 'cause the kids, they just probably wouldn't put up with that test, having something rammed up their
I wouldn't
nose.
think so, but.
Oh,
But
boy.
I
Unless they
don't
get-
know if it's out yet, but any day they're supposed to be having more of another test that isn't as invasive.
Thank
as that.
God.
Yeah, because I don't know if it's.
I don't know when.
They don't know, and I'm not sure they know how effective it is too, you know, some.
Oh,
of
the
them-
reliability.
Yeah,
Oh,
or they were
okay.
saying that it has to be done exactly just thus and so, and if you don't do the steps like they say, it could be inaccurate, so.
Yeah.
If they're
Huh.
doing it on, if you're doing it on your own, so.
Wow.
Ugh, it's just not,
I don't want it.
no.
Well, that's Deuteronomy, folks. We made it through.
All right.
So we made it through.
Everybody,
We made it through Leviticus. We made it through Deuteronomy. Not bad. Not bad.
Yes.
woo!
Matthew's gonna be a lot better.
When did we start this?
I don't know.
A year and a half ago?
1492.
Feels like it.
It'll be blue.
Feels like it.
We're just gonna keep marching on through. Marching on through.
But we're gonna go to Matthew now, right?
Right. We're gonna pop over to Matthew.
Okay.
And
Chapter 1, 2, 3.
yeah, Matthew chapters 1, 2, and 3.
Okay.
We should be able to make it through. I'll go through a little overview of Matthew and maybe a brief overview of the Gospels and, how Matthew, Mark, and Luke are the synoptic Gospels are almost all the same, and how John's slightly different, and the purpose for each of the
Now,
Gospels.
Matthew, who wrote this, is the Matthew from one of Jesus' disciples, correct?
Right, he was a tax collector.
Tax collector.
Okay, so has anyone ever seen The Chosen yet? If you see it, they make Matthew OCD. He double checks things, he's always touching things, like, kind of, like a It's really cool.
Yeah.
And he feels that that character is like that. And, but he changes so completely once he meets Jesus. It's really good
Well,
if you get to see The Chosen.
right,
It's,
and if you compare the Gospels, Matthew is a little bit longer than, because they say that Matthew was written after Mark. Mark is short, written for the Romans.
An in-depth, interdisciplinary study of the Hebrew Scriptures. Tonight's lesson is week number 1, an introduction to
but he
Deuteronomy.
says,
I don't know who that was.
Well, today we begin a study
Was
of
that
the
Mike?
final and 5th book of the Torah, the book of Deuteronomy, and we've come a long.
who is
Is
that?
that me or Gary?
That was me, that was Tom Bradford.
Oh, okay.
From the Torah class that gives the lecture.
Did RC touch it?
Yeah, he got on the
Yeah.
keyboard and
Oh.
Oh,
he's a rotten cat.
I thought that was my computer. Okay.
Oh.
All right, so yeah, so I'll just do a short overview of the Gospels, short overview of Matthew, then we'll dive into chapters 1, 2, and 3.
People are always blaming it on
Sounds
cats.
good.
Yeah.
Yeah, my cat would be jealous.
All right.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Good night.
I call her my
I want to
Good night.
sign off.